Hey everyone, welcome to Canada, the Illusion of Freedom and System of Control, Part 1, the System of Control. I'm remaking this video, hopefully with less ranting and more information. That being said, let's jump right in and start off with one of my favorite quotes. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Are you free? Or is it possible that you have been hopelessly enslaved because you falsely believe you are free? Is it possible that for generation after generation after generation, we have all been born and indoctrinated into, throughout our entire lives, a system of control under the illusion of freedom? Controlling people is not new. It's been going on throughout history. If you look all the way back to ancient Rome, the Romans gave their people the Colosseum. The Romans gave their people gladiators and chariot races, exotic animals from around the world, exotic fruits and foods from around the world, exotic feasts and celebrations, bread and wine, all in order to keep the people appeased, occupied, and distracted, and easier to control. If you look at today, it's the same plan, just with a tech update. Today we have reality TV shows. We have sports teams. We have NASCAR and Formula One. We have Canada Day. We have video games. We have Halloween. All of these things are meant to keep us appeased, occupied, and distracted. Just like in ancient Rome. Very same plan, tech update to suit the times. People have been studying how to best control other people for a long, long time as well. All you need to do for proof of that is look at The Art of War, Sun Tzu, The Prince by Machiavelli, The Politics of Obedience, Discourse on Voluntary Servitude by Etienne de la Boétie. These books were written hundreds and hundreds of years ago. So the plan to control other people is very, very old. It's been going on throughout time. The strategy has changed. The tactics have changed and the operations have changed. But the big picture goal is take over the world. It's happened throughout history. People have tried to take over the world. They're still doing it. However, through trial and error and study, they have determined that this strategy needed to be changed. Previously, throughout history, people have tried to take over the world through conquest, through war, through violence. And eventually, people stand up and fight back. They've learned these lessons throughout history and all of the wars throughout history. People will eventually fight back. So the strategy has changed. They've realized they need to gain, maintain, and increase their power and control over people, resources, and money, the big picture goal, through consent. They need our consent. And if you look at what's been going on for the past 20 years especially, calamity after calamity, crisis after crisis, problem, reaction, solution. The solution is always the same. Give up your freedoms, give us more power, and we'll handle the problem. When a lot of the time they've created the problem, knowing it will ignite a certain reaction from the people, and they will come along with a predetermined, pre-crafted solution that takes away more of our freedoms and gives them more power and control. It's very, very old. It's been going on for a very, very long time. It's the same plan, same strategy, control through consent, but the operations and tactics vary from country to country and have changed over time. But it's pretty much the same system. And in Canada, pretty much everything we've been taught and believe about Canada, about our government, about our legal system, is not true. It's all deception and fraud. So, people bickering about party, NDP, Liberal, Conservatives, Greens, more distraction, the illusion of choice. They all work for the same system. The system, our system here in Canada, is all fraud and deceit. Which throughout this series we're going to take a closer look at through their own acts and statutes. These aren't my words. These are through their own words. But part one is about the system of control. So that being said, let's dive right in and see what we can figure out. The system of control. So the planet is made up of land and water, mostly land and ocean and seas. So there are two parallel systems of law. Common law, law of the land, admiralty or maritime law, law of the sea. Common law, the law of the land, is the law of the people. Admiralty maritime law is banking law, merchant law, law of commerce, law of corporations. Now, we don't understand this by design. We're not meant to. All of our laws are written in legalese. Legalese is not English because they changed the definition of words. It looks like English, it sounds like English, but they've changed the definitions of words. And they write things in legalese so most people in the world can't understand them. Yet, they expect us to know and understand the laws that govern us. So, we've been tricked into leaving one legal jurisdiction and entering another. We've been tricked out of leaving the common law jurisdiction and entering admiralty, maritime, Roman civil law. One is law of the people, law of the land. The other is law of the sea, law of commerce, law of banking, law of artificial persons, law of corporations. We've gone from being considered in law, from being human beings, to enslaved artificial persons and corporations. Would a fair, just, lawful legal system have to trick you into entering its jurisdiction? Would a fair, just, lawful legal government have to trick you into your consent, into entering its jurisdiction? Going from a human being to an artificial person or a corporation? Would a government, would a fair, just, lawful, legal government have to do that? Common law, law of the people, law of the land, law of human beings. The law of inherent rights, unalienable rights, God-given rights, common sense law, case law, the do no harm, do not threaten harm law, law that's based on natural law, that people inherently know good from evil, right from wrong, do no harm. Under common law, human beings have the duty to do no harm. That's an inherent, unalienable duty. God-given duty. Do no harm. Then we have admiralty, maritime, Roman civil law. To make it easier to understand, consider it banking and corporate law, just to give it a name, because it's very confusing, and it's meant to be confusing. We're not meant to ever figure this out. But this jurisdiction of law is law of artificial persons, legal fictions, and corporations. This jurisdiction of law does not recognize human beings. Again, it's banking, corporate, merchant, contract law. Acts, statutes, regulations, and codes created by governments. It's granted rights and imposed duties. And granted rights can be taken away. Imposed duties can be increased through acts, statutes, regulations, and codes. And we have been tricked into voluntarily leaving this system, the common law, law of the people, law of the land, law of human beings, into entering this law of fictions. The tools that they use to trick us into and staying in their system. Well, they use legalese. Legalese was created by law societies. It changes the definitions of words from common usage into legal definitions in legalese. Only members of law societies and people that work within law societies know legalese. It's their creation. It was created by them, for them. We're not meant to understand it. It's meant to confuse and trick us, especially now with being tricked into the corporate banking jurisdiction. They use ignorance. They don't teach us how the law works. In fact, they give us a different idea about law and justice altogether. They use indoctrination. We're not educated any longer. We're indoctrinated throughout school and university. Just look at what's going on with the world today, and you can see people, they can't do simple math anymore. But they're social justice warriors. They don't tell us we have a choice. You would think an honest government would say, okay, here's our proposal. Join our system and you get these benefits. This is what's expected of you. These are your granted rights. These are your imposed duties. This is what it's going to cost you to enter our system. Or you can choose to take personal responsibility for your own life, for your own finances, not rely on any government services whatsoever, and go ahead and live your life with the inherent duty to do no harm. If you do harm, there will be consequences. Simple choice. Freedom of choice. We're not given freedom of choice. However, we're tricked into entering their system of jurisdiction on our own free will. Is that law, or is that the color of law? They keep us occupied and distracted. Again, looking back at Rome with the Colosseum and the gladiators. Same thing today, tech update. They keep us chasing the almighty dollar. They make it harder and harder just to get by, all by design. They're slowly draining us of our money and our energy and our freedom. And we, through fraud and deceit, have been tricked into consenting. They use fraud and deceit, and because we are ignorant and complacent, they're successful over and over with their fraud and their deceit and their indoctrination. They use intimidation, bullying by police or judges. Whenever you see videos of people that are standing up for their rights, quite often police and judges get very, very irritated. They use incarceration, so they'll just throw you in jail. They use fines, tax audits, other nefarious tactics used by governments to silence people. Our consent to enter this system was given in ignorance because of a deliberate deception and fraud. They tell us one thing, but they don't give us the whole picture. To understand the law in Canada and in most of the world, you have to understand the tools that they use in the construction and interpretation of statutes, acts and statutes. They use maxims of law, which are rules of law, basically. An established principle or proposition, a principle of law that's universally admitted as being just, consonant with reason. They use rules of language developed by the courts to help them interpret act, statutes, and regulations. And these, by default, stem back to law societies. Judges and lawyers are part of law societies. People in government are part of law societies. So maxims, rules of language, rules of law, that all stems back to law societies. Part of the rules of language are definitions. Legal definitions of the words that are used in acts, statutes, and regulation. Very important definitions to understand are person, corporation, application, registration. These are very, very important words to understand their legal definitions, which are quite often different from our common usage definitions and understanding. And not only do you have to know the legal definition of the word, but you have to understand the rules they use when they create, when they write and interpret statute law, acts, statutes, and regulations. There's different sources for the definitions. Some acts, statutes, and regulations will have the definitions used in that legislation, included in that legislation. They use legal dictionaries. They use, here in Canada, the Interpretation Act is the highest legal definition of a word in an act, statute, or regulation or code. So it's very, very important that we understand the legal definition and the tools used when creating the act or statute to understand and be able to interpret it. For example, under the law, there are two types of person. There's the natural person, sometimes known as the private person, which is a human being. Natural person has inherent, unalienable rights recognized under international law. A natural person has the right to be recognized as an artificial person. They cannot impose any duty for us to be recognized as an artificial person. Our duty as a natural person, as a human being, is to do no harm. That's our duty. That's our inherent duty. Do no harm. Pretty simple. An artificial person is a legal entity, not a human being, recognized as a person in law. They do not have inherent rights. An artificial person can be created by your birth certificate. An artificial person has rights and duties that are granted and imposed under acts, statutes, and regulations. And once again, these imposed duties and granted rights can be taken away through acts, statutes, and regulations. Our birth registration and certificate creates an artificial person. Under the law, it's considered a corporation, which we'll see moving forward. We're told we must register our children. We're told we must apply for a birth certificate. It's the most important identification a person can have. We're not told an artificial person is created with the same name as our children, the birth certificate. We're not told that when the birth certificate changes the style of the name to all capitals, what that signifies. We're not told we have a choice. Enter our system, take responsibility for your own life. Free will, freedom of choice. We're not taught how this system works. If it was a fair, just, legal, lawful system, they would just say, okay, this is what the world is. It's not a system of fundamental rights and freedoms. It's a system of control with the illusion of fundamental rights and freedoms. It's granted rights and imposed duties, and these can be increased or taken away at their discretion. A perfect example of this in Canada is the Notwithstanding Clause in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Section 33. To paraphrase, it says, despite anything in Section 2, your fundamental freedoms, or Section 7 to 15, your legal rights, Parliament or the legislature can write an act or a provision of an act that's legal, despite your fundamental freedoms, despite your legal rights. Are we free if they can just take away our rights with acts, statutes, and regulations? Is that a free and just system? Is it a free and democratic system if, despite the will of the people, the government does whatever it wants with zero accountability to the people? Leaving us the only remedy to wait until the next election, vote that person or party out of power, and hope that the next person or party is honorable, is not part of the system, which they are. It's the illusion of choice. It's the illusion of freedom in a system of control. Is that the rule of law? Does that sound like the rule of law to you, or the color of law? Think of it this way. The people that really control the world, the families, everyone is familiar who they are, the New World Order, the Illuminati, the shadow government, the deep state, whatever you want to call them. An easy way to think of this is, of course, the pyramid, which is very well known, the people at the top and we're at the very bottom. But you can look at this system of control, how it works, like you're going to work for a corporation. If you are going to go to work for a corporation, you agree to the terms and conditions of the contract and the policies and procedures of that corporation. Hopefully, you've read the contract, understand these things, and you sign the contract knowing what is expected of you and what you will get in return, what benefits you will get, and what compensation you will get for your work. It's informed consent. It's a choice. You can either go and work for that corporation or choose not to and go work somewhere else. It's a choice. Now, through the birth registration and certificate, unbeknownst to us, creating the artificial person and then applying for our social insurance number, our artificial person goes to work for Corporation Canada or the Government of Canada Incorporated. Our job title is taxpayer. Our social insurance number is our employee ID number. We're not told we have a choice. We're not told that in this system we can be stripped of all of our rights and freedoms through acts, statutes, and regulations. We're not compensated for working for this Corporation of Canada. In fact, we're taxed for the privilege of working for this corporation. Our consent to go to work for this corporation, to enter their jurisdiction and governance, was given in ignorance because of a deliberate deception and fraud. Our contract with the government through the birth registration and certificate and social insurance number are null and void because those contracts are based on deliberate deception and fraud, as is our entire government, legal system, and the country of Canada. Does that sound legal and lawful? Is that a legal contract based on deliberate deception and fraud? Is that freedom of choice if we're forced, unbeknownst to us, to work for the Corp Canada or the Government of Canada Incorporated? Is that freedom of association? Is that a fair and just system? Is that even freedom? Or is that the illusion of freedom in a system of control? Are you free? Or are you hopelessly enslaved because you falsely believe you are free? Or have you been hopelessly enslaved because you falsely believed you were free? Hopefully people's eyes are opening at an incredible pace. You can see signs of it all over the place, that people are actually waking up and learning the truth about the world. But there's a long way to go. From Department of Justice, what is the law? Oops. The law affects nearly every aspect of our lives every day. We have laws to deal with crimes like robbery and murder, and we have laws that govern activities like driving a car, getting a job, and getting married. Laws give us rules of conduct that protect everyone's rights. The rule of law, freedom under the law, democratic principles, and respect for others form the foundation of Canada's legal heritage. Every Canadian should understand the law and the ideas and principles behind it. This publication will help readers understand. And it goes on to say, yes, laws benefit workers on the job, insurance when workers are unemployed. And now, laws can be divided into public and private. Public law sets the rules for relationships between the individual and society. If someone breaks a criminal law, it is seen as wrong against society. It includes criminal law, constitutional law, and administrative law, which deals with actions and operations of government. Then we have private law, which sets the rules between individuals. It's also called civil law. Private law settles disputes among groups of people and compensates victims. A civil case is an action that settles private disputes. Okay, from the Justice Department. Let's have a look what the Canadian Superior Courts Judges Association has to say about the sources of our law. Legislation is enacted by every level of government in Canada. The common law, also referred to as case law. Civil law in the province of Quebec. So, three sources of law: legislation, common law, and civil law. What does the Good Old Canada Guide have to say? The Canadian legal system. Once again, people, this is the kind of stuff that they're teaching us about our legal system. Canada's legal system is based around British common law traditions, and Canadians' legal rights are protected by a written constitution and a Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The Magna Carta. The cornerstone of common law is the Magna Carta. All right. Though Canada is now completely independent from Britain, English common law still applies to the country, as it does to the United States and other former British colonies. Common law is basically a collection of precedents or age-old understandings that define many important legal concepts in the English-speaking world, which is exactly true. Right and wrong do no harm. Very, very old principles and very, very easy to understand. If you do harm, there's consequences, which set precedences. The opposite of the common law system is the civil law system. Parliamentary supremacy, which basically parliamentary supremacy, we can read it up here, was any law Parliament wrote was law. That was it. It was law, that was it. No disputing. Excuse me. But according to the handy Canada Guide, parliamentary supremacy ended in 1982 when the Canadian Constitution was reformed and a new section called the Charter of Rights and Freedoms was added. The Charter said that some human rights were so important, Parliament could not pass any laws that violated them. And they're saying different types of law: criminal law, federal law, and so on and so forth. But the Charter was added. The Charter said some human rights were so important, Parliament could not pass any laws that violated them. All right, let's have a look at the Charter. Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Whereas Canada is founded upon the principles that recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law. Guarantee of rights and freedoms. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it subject only to such reasonable limits prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. Well, doesn't that sound lovely and reassuring? Section 2 lists our fundamental freedoms: the freedom of conscience and religion, freedom of thought, belief, opinion, and expression, including freedom of the press, freedom of peaceful assembly, and freedom of association. And here, again, we have to pay close attention to the words they're using. Everyone. Under democratic rights, we see that every citizen of Canada. Mobility rights, every citizen of Canada. Legal rights, life, liberty, and security of the person. Back to everyone. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of the person, and right not to be deprived thereof, except in accordance with the principles of fundamental justice. Our other legal rights are listed down here to section 15. But a very important word in this statement, life, liberty, and security of the person. Keep that word in mind, person. So it lists our fundamental freedoms and our legal rights. However, what they don't teach us and what is not widely known is jumping down to section 33. Parliament or legislature of a province may expressly declare in an act of Parliament or the legislature, as the case may be, that the act or a provision thereof shall operate, notwithstanding a provision included in section 2 or sections 7 to 15 of this charter. Okay, well, so through an act of Parliament or the legislature, an act or a provision shall operate notwithstanding section 2 and 7 to 15. So notwithstanding our fundamental freedoms and legal rights. Exception where express declaration. So our constitutional document, our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, lists our fundamental freedoms and our legal rights. But then down here on section 33, it says, yeah, we've listed those, but an act of Parliament or the legislature can take them all away. What we don't know a lot about, and no one really talks about, is maritime and admiralty law. And again, there's two parallel systems. There's land and there's oceans and seas and territorial waters. The federal court has jurisdiction to resolve all disputes under Canadian maritime law and under any law relating to a matter coming within the class of subject of navigation and shipping, whether on the high seas or within Canadian territorial waters. And it gives examples. Everything about shipping, and this is from the federal courts. It's very difficult to find more material on maritime and admiralty law other than stuff like this. It involves shipping and yada, yada, yada. Here we are at duhame.org and Canadian Maritime Law, a primer. Let's see what they have to say. Maritime law is the oldest actively practiced area of law in Canada. Maritime law arrived in Canada with the first European explorers and remains, in many respects, the same as it was hundreds of years ago. Unlike areas of law such as criminal law and constitutional law, which are predominantly created by legislation and modified by the courts, maritime law is a broad historical collection of laws originating from historical practice, international conventions, domestic and foreign legislation, and court decisions from dozens of seafaring countries around the world. So, very much like common law, maritime law is very old. Common law, law of the land; maritime admiralty law, law of the sea. Canada's highest court, the Supreme Court of Canada, defined Canadian maritime law as having two major components. Firstly is the Admiralty Law of England, received into Canada in 1934, which is now a body of federal law encompassing the common law principles of tort, contract, and bailment, applied uniformly across the country. So we can see right there a body of federal law encompassing common law principles of tort, contract, and bailment. Well, what is tort? The body of law which allows an injured person to obtain compensation from the person who caused injury. Well, that sounds like civil law. That sounds like common law. One common element is that someone has sustained a loss or harm as a result of some act or failure to act by another. Tort is perhaps the last bastion of common law. Tort law remains uncodified and in large part unaffected by statute. So, going back here, we can see that it's a big body of federal law that encompasses common law principles now of tort, contract, and bailment. The second very broad component includes matters falling within the modern context of commerce and shipping, limited only by the constitutional division of power in Canada's Constitution. So there you have it. This is not from a conspiracy site. This is from Duhane.org. A legal site. And it's saying Admiralty law in Canada since 1934, which is now a body of federal law with huge encompassing jurisdiction. And the second component is commerce and shipping. Fall within the modern context of commerce and shipping, banking laws, corporate laws. Now, let's jump back in time while we're discussing Admiralty law and take a look at this. The Colonial Courts of Admiralty Act 1890. We all know that in 1890, Canada was a dominion of the UK. An act to amend the law respecting the exercise of Admiralty jurisdiction in Her Majesty's dominions and elsewhere out of the United Kingdom. The exercise of Admiralty jurisdiction. It's plain as day. the colonial courts of admiralty. Every court of law in a British possession, which is for the time being declared in pursuance of this act to be a court of admiralty, or which, if no such declaration is in force in the possession, has therein original unlimited service civil jurisdiction, shall be a court of admiralty. There you go. A British possession was Canada in 1890, the Dominion of Canada. Be it declared or not declared, the courts, every court shall be a court of admiralty. So there we have it. Now, since I've found this, thanks to Doug Force at the Myth is Canada, by the way, I have not been able to find any other acts or statutes or information except stuff like this that says, yes, we're under Admiralty law. I haven't found anywhere in our justice.ca, in our jurisdiction of the courts. I only find stuff like this: appellate jurisdiction. Jurisdiction throughout Canada. The court shall have and exercise an appellate civil and criminal jurisdiction within and throughout Canada. It doesn't say anything about Admiralty jurisdiction, or this is an Admiralty court, and this is the Supreme Court Act. So if any of you out there have found an act or statute that shows Canada, that says Canadian courts are no longer Admiralty courts, please comment and send me that information. We all need to learn from each other, and we all need to do our own research and develop our own level of knowledge and understanding. Law societies. So this is from the Canadian Bar Association. And lots of people believe that the bar associations govern the legal practice. But we can see here, governing standards and practice, that law societies, not the Canadian Bar Association, govern Canada's legal profession, as they do in the rest of the world. Law societies created law. They created legalese. And members of law society work as lawyers, judges, members of the government. So the law societies have spread out everywhere. Now, I'm not saying lawyers are bad. There's a lot of really great lawyers out there. But they're fighting in a corrupt system. They're fighting in a system based on fraud and deception. And I'm sure they're not taught their first day of law school what the system is, what it actually is. Otherwise, you would have to be absolutely diabolical, evil, and a villain to become a lawyer. And there's a lot of good lawyers out there. Right now, look at Rocco Galati. He's trying to fight for Canadians under Charter of Rights and Freedoms requirements and breaches, but I don't think he's going to be successful. In this system, however, it's rigged. It's a system by them, for them, to protect them. And what I'm talking about is judges, courts, and the legal system, and governments. So in the courts and the legal system, when there's constitutional challenges, they have to let a few slide. They have to have winners sometimes Otherwise, people would just say, no, the whole system's rigged. This is nonsense. I'm not going to be a part of it. But if people think there's a chance, and people like Rocco Galati with the best intentions at heart fight and win occasionally, then we have the carrot dangling. Then we have the illusion of the rule of law in a system of fraud and deceit and color of law. That being said, so law societies, through lawyers, judges, governments, create rules. So, rules of the Supreme Court of Canada. So, like I said, there's maxims of law, which are rules used in the courts by judges, used by lawyers, used by governments in the construction of statutes. So, rules of the Supreme Court. If you look all the way back, by default, these are written by the Law Society because judges are members of law societies. And as we saw before, they're also members of their own judge societies, the Canadian Superior Court Judges Association. So that being said, as always, we need to look at application and interpretation. Except as otherwise provided by the Act or any other Act of Parliament, these rules apply to all proceedings in the court. And this is the Supreme Court of Canada. So these rules apply to the Supreme Court of Canada. The following definitions apply in these rules. Like I said, sometimes the Act or statute has definitions used included. So here we go. We're only concerned with one word today. We're going to look at the word person. Person includes a body politic or corporate, Her Majesty the Queen, and an Attorney General. Well, if you think about that definition and think about the word person in common usage understanding. When most people think of the word person, they think a man or a woman, a human being. But now, if we use the common usage definition, person, a man or woman, human being, includes a body politic or corporate, Her Majesty the Queen, and an Attorney General. Well, that doesn't make much sense at all, does it? Because we're using our understanding, our common usage understanding of the word person. And we're not applying rules of statute creation and interpretation when we're trying to read this definition. Let's take a look at another one. Here's the Federal Court Rules, which stems from the Federal Courts Act. Once again, we want to look at application and interpretation. These rules apply to all proceedings in the Federal Court of Appeal and the Federal Court, unless otherwise provided by or under an Act of Parliament. Excuse me. And interpretation. So we have a definition section. Let's jump on down and see if we can find there it is, the word person. What do you know? Person includes a tribunal, an unincorporated association, and a partnership. Once again, if we apply our common usage definition and understanding of the word person, this makes no sense whatsoever. Man or woman or human being includes a tribunal, an unincorporated association, and a partnership. We're not applying rules of language. We're not applying maxims of law used in the construction and interpretation of statutes. The Federal Courts Act, definitions in this act. We see person is not defined in this act. Let's have a look at the Interpretation Act. Person, or any word or expression descriptive of a person, includes a corporation. Now, once again, if we apply our common usage understanding of the word person, or a word or expression descriptive of a person, includes a corporation. So, man or woman or human being includes a corporation. Well, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it makes more sense than the previous two definitions of person. But once again, we haven't applied our rules of language and our maxims of law when we're trying to read and interpret these definitions. So let's learn some more about it. What is a maxim? Lots of people have heard of maxims. A broad statement of principle, the truth and reasonableness of which are self-evident. A rule of equity, the system of justice that complements the common law. The principles of equity and justice are universal in the common law courts of the world. They are flexible principles aimed at achieving justice for both sides in each case. No maxim is ever absolute, but all of the principles must be weighed and fitted to the facts of an individual controversy. Maxims were originally quoted in Latin, and many of the Latin phrases continue to be familiar to lawyers in the early 2000s. The maxims were not written down in an organized code or enacted by legislatures, but they have been handed down through generations of judges. As a result, the wording of a maxim may vary from case to case. So, maxims are rules that have been handed down by judges to help them interpret statutes and determine fair outcomes. Maxim, an established principle or proposition, a principle of law universally admitted as being just and consonant with reason. This is the definition from Bouvier's 1956 Law Dictionary that I used in the PowerPoint. They are principles and authorities and part of the general customs or common law of the land. They are of the same strength as acts of parliament when the judges have determined what is a maxim. So they're rules from judges that carry the same weight as acts of parliament. Now, a very important maxim is expressio unius est exclusio alterius. I likely butchered that pronunciation, but how many people out there speak Latin? Wow, expressio unius est exclusio ulterius. That's a mouthful. New Latin, the explicit mention of one thing is the exclusion of another. A principle in statutory construction. When one or more things of a class are expressly mentioned, others of the same class are excluded. Okay. So the expression of one is the exclusion of another. Used in statutory construction. Okay. The expression of one thing is the exclusion of the other. A maxim of interpretation, meaning that the expression of one thing is the exclusion of the other. When certain persons or things are specified in a law, contract, or will, an intention to exclude all others from its operation may be inferred. In this case, so it gives a case. Okay, so we see that it's a rule of construction, and it's also used in interpretation of statutes. The expression of one thing excludes all others. Expressio unius est exclusio ulterius. The explicit mention of one thing is the exclusion of another. A principle in statutory construction, when one or more things of a class are expressly mentioned, others of the same class are excluded. That which is express is included, and that which is not is excluded. So, included is an important word to understand expressio unius est exclusio ulterius. Something that's expressed is included in the statute, and anything that's not included is excluded. A rule of statutory interpretation that says that if something is mentioned as being included, then anything that is not mentioned is by implication meant not to be included. Okay. Now, let's quickly jump back and revisit our definitions using that rule. A person includes a body politic, Her Majesty, and an Attorney General. So, a person in this definition includes only these things: a body politic or corporate, the Queen, and an Attorney General. It excludes all others because only these are included. So, under this legal definition, a person is a body politic or corporate, the Queen, or an Attorney General. That's it. The expression of one is the exclusion of all others. The inclusion of one thing excludes all others that aren't included. And that's in the rules of the Supreme Court. So a person is not a man or a woman in the rules of the Supreme Court, but a body politic, corporate, the Queen, or an Attorney General. Only those things. Let's look at this definition from the federal court rules. A person includes a tribunal, an unincorporated association, and a partnership. So it doesn't say a human being. It doesn't say a man or a woman. It doesn't say a living being. It says tribunal, unincorporated association, and partnership. Therefore, understanding and applying the maxim of statute construction and interpretation, the inclusion of one excludes all others, we can see includes only these things. So man, woman, human being, those are excluded in this definition. And this, once again, is the federal court rules. So if in the Supreme Court and the federal court, the definition of person doesn't include man, woman, human being, citizen, living being, the definition only includes what's listed. So a man or a woman or a human being is not even recognized in federal court or in the Supreme Court. So once again, maxims and phrases for CLAT judiciary and law exams. Maxims are a very important element in part of the rules that the legal societies use. What are legal maxims? Legal maxims are established principles of law that are universally admitted, and the people in the legal field are very well aware of these words. They are mostly Latin words or a combination of a few words. So I'm just illustrating the point how important maxims of law are, and especially expressio unius est exclusio alterius. Because if you don't know this maxim that they used when creating the act or statute, and when you're trying to read and interpret that act or statute, and you get to definitions like we did, they make no sense. But as soon as you apply this rule and other rules that they use, things all of a sudden make sense. We're not taught about this stuff by design. We're not meant to understand it. But more and more people all around the world for a long, long time have understood how the system works and are working on educating people. One of the maxims of law, ignorance of the law is not a defense. Lots of people have heard that. It's been around for a long, long time. Just to, again, illustrate how important maxims are in the whole big scope of law societies and laws, the Canadian government put into the Criminal Code of Canada a maximum of law, ignorance of the law. Ignorance of the law by a person who commits an offense is not an excuse for committing that offense. There's that word person again. So maxims are very important. And if we go back to the Interpretation Act, a person or any word or expression descriptive of a person includes a corporation. So that excludes everything else. Man, woman, human being. A person under the Interpretation Act of Canada is a corporation. The inclusion of one excludes all others. And then when we look at the criminal code, ignorance of the law by a person who commits an offense is not an excuse for committing that offense. Ignorance of the law by a corporation who commits an offense is not an excuse for committing that offense. Person under the Interpretation Act of Canada is a corporation, not man, woman, or human being. Natural law. Natural law is the philosophy that certain rights, moral values, and responsibilities are inherent in human nature, and those rights can be understood through simple reasoning. In other words, they just make sense when you consider the nature of humanity. The definition of natural law: the belief that certain laws of morality are inherent by human nature, reason, or religious belief, and that they are ethically binding on humanity, which they are. The basis of common law is right and wrong. Do no harm. It stems from natural law, that inherently humans, through nature, reason, religious belief, know right from wrong. Pretty simple laws. Do no harm, right from wrong. It's the basis of common law. A natural person. The term natural person refers to a living human being with certain rights and responsibilities under the law. Whoa. Come back here. A natural person. A human being as distinguished from a person as a corporation created by an operation of law. Okay, let's look at another one. An entity established, let's look at artificial person. So a human being is a natural person, as distinguished from a person as a corporation created by law. Okay, artificial person. An entity established by law and given at least some legal rights and duties of a human being. Corporations are the most common types of artificial persons. Artificial person is an entity created by law and given certain rights and duties of a human being. It can be real or imaginary, and for the purpose of legal reasoning is treated more or less as a human being. For example, corporation, company, etc. An artificial person is also referred to as a fictitious person, a juristic person, a judicial person, a legal person, or a moral person. Black's Law. A non-human entity that is created by law and is legally different, owning its own rights and duties. Juristic person and legal person refer to body corporate. Okay, so we can see that the natural person is a human being, a man or a woman. The artificial person is a corporation. Now let's jump back into the Interpretation Act, where we can see a person or any word or expression descriptive of a person includes a corporation, which excludes everything else. So there you have it, folks. A person is a corporation under the Interpretation Act of Canada. How can that be? What does that mean? Common law, law of the people, law of the land. Corporate banking law, law of artificial persons, legal fictions, and corporations. From the land of the living to the land of the dead, through the birth registration and certificate. And let's find out what actually happened. Capitis diminutio. Here we go. More Latin. In Roman law, a diminishing or abridgment of personality. This was a loss or curtailment of a man's status or aggregate of legal attributes and qualifications, following upon certain changes in civil condition. It was of three kinds: capitis diminutio maxima, capitis diminutio media, and capitis diminutio minima. Today, we're only focused on capitis diminutio maxima. The highest or most comprehensive loss of status. This occurred when a man's condition was changed from one of freedom to one of bondage, when he became a slave. It swept away with it all rights of citizenship and family rights. Capitis diminutio literally means diminishing of a person's personality or status. A person may lose his personality or legal capacity either in whole or in part. And once again, down here we can see capitis diminutio maxima, consisting of the loss of liberty, citizenship, and family. Here a person's status is changed from freedom to bondage. In capitis diminutio maxima, there is a highest loss of status. So once again, we can see that capitis diminutio maxima is the complete loss of civil status, or the highest and most comprehensive loss of status when someone went from freedom to bondage, when they became a slave and lost all of their rights. So what does this have to do with the system of control? That is what happens, capitis diminutio maxima, when parents register their newborn baby with the government and apply for a birth certificate. The legal person is created by the government, and through capitis diminutio maxima, the newborn human being goes from a state of freedom with the duty to do no harm to an artificial person, a corporation with granted rights and imposed duties that can be taken away through acts, statutes, and regulations. Where that happened was through the birth registration and birth certificate. And the person has been changed from a living being into an artificial person. That is why the style of the name changes, not the spelling. The spelling remains the same, the style changes. I'll show you what I mean. Here's some examples from British Columbia. So this is an example of the registration of live birth. And we can see the name. It's hard to read, but it says Sandra Lee Mason. Sandra and Lee are written normally. With both capital and small letters. So is the name of the hospital. So is the name of the doctor. But when we get down to the father's name or the mother's name, we can see the first name is written normally, but the surnames are written in all capitals, just like up here. Now, I don't have any children, so I don't know. The people at the hospital that are instructed or tasked with filling this out might be instructed to write it this way, change the style of the name to all capitals. Or it might say it on the form somewhere, I'm not sure. But a human being, a man or a woman, writes their name like this. We don't typically write our names like this. Corporations write their names in all capital letters. So here's the registration of live birth. But then, when we jump back, whoops, that's the wrong picture. This will illustrate the same point. But we can see when we get our birth certificate, it's all capital letters, usually. Sometimes only the surname is in all capital letters. The first and middle name are normal. I believe is it this one? No, it's not. Here it is. So this is from BC. This is from the same example. So we saw the birth registration form. And now we can see on the birth certificate example that the name style has completely changed to all capital letters. And up here, from the province and vital statistics, it says this is to certify that the following is an extract from the registration on file with vital statistics. So the birth certificate is an extract from the birth registration form, which is an extract of the certificate of live birth. So the certificate of live birth, or record of birth, whatever they call it, this is the original document. This is the proof that this person was born to these parents on this day at this place, and these attending medical professionals attest and certify that this happened. This is the highest form of identification because it's the first. The information on the registration of birth is an extract of this information. The birth certificate is then an extract from the registration of live birth. So this signifies the birth of the human being. The registration of live birth signifies capitis diminutio maxima, taking a human being free through birth registration and the certificate, attaching an artificial person to that living human being, to, unbeknownst to them, drag them into from freedom to bondage, to enslavement. That's exactly how it happens. So again, we can see when this is old, of course, so it's handwritten, but people write their names with a capital first letter and small letters. But then, when we get our government IDs, it looks like this. Or at very least, the surname is in all caps. The corporation, the artificial person. The difference between a birth certificate and certificate of live birth. For most purposes of identification, people use the birth certificate as the original document, but some have recently heard about something called the certificate of live birth. What is the difference between birth certificate and certificate of live birth? So here we go. This is from Black's Law. Hospital record of birth is the certificate of live birth. The original identification document. The birth certificate, the official government issued record of birth. The birth certificate. This is fraud. It's the official government issued creation of the artificial person. One comes from the hospital where the human being, the man or woman, was born. The other one comes from the government when the artificial person was created. If you look at the birth certificate, you can see the date of birth. This is when the child was born. But this date of registration, March 18th, was the date the artificial person was created. April 18th was when the birth certificate was issued to the human being, attaching the artificial person. When you were born, you were given a certificate of live birth and a birth certificate. That's not true either. Typically, if you are required to prove your identity, you should use your birth certificate. Some people wonder if there is a difference between a birth certificate and the certificate of live birth. The answer is that there is. One records your birth into the world, and the other allows you to use it for identifying purposes throughout your life. So, we're not given a birth certificate. We have to apply for a birth certificate through the newborn registration. What's the difference between a birth registration and birth certificate? A birth registration contains information about the birth and is used to create a permanent legal record. A birth certificate is an extract from the original birth registration and is a government document that can be used for identification purposes and obtaining other government services. So again, do you want to be part of the system and be eligible for all of those services, or do you want to take personal responsibility for your own life? That's what it boils down to. What is birth registration? Birth registration in Ontario is a two-step process. A notice of birth is provided to the Office of the Registrar General by the physician, midwife, nurse, or other informant. A statement of live birth form is completed by the parents of the newborn using the newborn registration service or filling out the paper and sending it in. So the hospital takes an extract from the certificate of live birth, fills out a notice of birth. The parents fill out a registration of live birth, and then the birth certificate is created. And they tell you that you have to. All births that occur in Alberta must be registered by the baby's parents with the Alberta government. They need us to do this, to register our children, to create the artificial person, because the government borrows money based on the taxes, the tax revenue that will be generated by that artificial person through the human being's entire life. Registering a birth in Saskatchewan, by law, every child born in Saskatchewan must be registered. Registration is needed to create a permanent record of a person's birth and order a birth certificate. A permanent record of the person's birth was created through the live birth certificate. Filled out by the doctors at the hospital. That is permanent legal record that you were born. This registration to create a permanent record of the person's birth, that is not true. There's already a permanent record of the person's birth. And the registration form is an extract of that information. And then the birth certificate is an extract from the birth registration form. And they tell you most parents will complete the registration process at the hospital. After the birth of their baby, parents will receive a registration of live birth form that allows them to quickly and easily register their child's birth and also access related government services. So they're telling you, yes, to be eligible for these services, you need to register your child. Which is true. They don't tell you you have a choice. That you can say, I don't want your benefits. I don't want anything from the government, but to be left alone, to live my life under my inherent duty to do no harm. Go away, leave me alone. Is that freedom when we don't have a choice? Is that freedom when by law we are forced to register our children with the government and apply for a birth certificate? Everyone needs to really, really research the words apply, application, and registration. When you register something, you sign over the ownership of that thing that you've registered. When you apply for something, it is assumed that you know exactly what you are applying for. If you don't know exactly what you're applying for, the onus is on you. Legally, the onus is on you. Another legal maxim is, let he be deceived who will be deceived. If you fall for it, that's on you. But they tell us every person must be registered, once again, so the artificial person can be created. Birth registration is the only way to create a permanent legal record of your child's birth in British Columbia. Birth registration is essential to apply for important services like birth certificates, medical services, child benefits, and social insurance number, which is absolutely true. But they're not saying you have a choice. And the first permanent legal record is your certificate of live birth. Everything else is an extract from that document, from the original document. The birth registration form is an extract of the certificate of live birth, and the birth certificate is an extract from the birth registration. Capitis diminutio maxima, going from a free, brand new, free-born human being to an artificial person enslaved by a system of control under the illusion of freedom. Just like that. A birth certificate is one of the most important vital documents that any person should have and will be required at several points throughout a person's life. The general purpose of a birth certificate serves to identify a person. Boy, that's a true statement, isn't it? If we look back at our definition of person from the Interpretation Act, and it says a person is a corporation. Well, of course, they're telling us it's one of the most important vital documents any person, any corporation should have. And to be part of the system of control will be required throughout a person's life. Its general purpose is to identify a person, the artificial person, the corporation, not the human being. Your birth certificate is an important legal document that establishes who you are and when and where you were born. A birth certificate is required for many important applications. There's that word again, like passport, medical services, social insurance number, and school enrollment. So the system makes it very, very difficult for a human being to exist and survive in the system of artificial persons and corporations. They are desperate to keep you there. They are desperate to get your children and grandchildren into the system as well. And once again, a person or any word or expression descriptive of a person includes a corporation. The inclusion of one excludes all others. A person or any word or expression descriptive of a person is a corporation, not a man or a woman, not a human being. The last piece of the puzzle is the social insurance number. Once again, they tell us we need this number to work in Canada and to have access to government programs and benefits. As a free human being, do you need permission from the government to work? As a free man or woman, what duty do you have to get a social insurance number in order to work? This is the last piece of the puzzle. This is what takes the artificial person, the corporation, and puts it to work for Corporation Canada or the Government of Canada Incorporated. We apply, once again, and it is assumed by the government that we know exactly what we are applying for, even if they don't tell us. It's assumed because we're applying. We want to be part of the club. We're applying to get in there. So it is assumed by default that we know exactly what we're applying for and everything that goes along with it, which we don't because they don't tell us. Fraud and deceit. So we get our social insurance number. Now we are officially an employee of the Government of Canada. And we're just like if we joined any other corporation, we're subject to the terms and conditions, the policies and procedures, the rules, the regulations of the corporation. If we break the terms and conditions or policies and procedures or rules, we can be punished by prison and fines, which we have voluntarily agreed to through the registration of birth, applying for a birth certificate, and applying for a social insurance number. Our consent has been given through those processes. Whether we know it or not, whether it's informed or uninformed consent, it's assumed that it's informed consent. It's assumed that you know what you're applying for. And now, to avoid any hassles, they make it very easy now. Now you can apply for the social insurance number for your child when you register the birth. So it's all in one now. We've made it very easy for you. We've created the artificial person and we'll enslave the artificial person to the Corporation of Canada all in one click of the mouse. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. So, that's what the system is. That's how it works. Capitis diminutio maxima. Taking the live man or woman baby, the live human being that's just been born free, with the duty to do no harm, and unbeknownst to the parents, through the registration and application process, has enslaved their children. And it's been going on for generations. They tell us about the benefits, but they don't tell us everything. It's not a legal contract if it's based on fraud and deceit. And we have to be aware of things like assumption. When you have to be aware, when you apply for something, again, it's a maxim of law. When you apply for something, it's assumed that you know exactly what you're applying for. So read application forms and stuff very carefully because they use legalese to trick us into all of this stuff. And again, I ask you, would a fair and just system have to trick you into it? I ask you again, are you free? Or have you been hopelessly enslaved because you falsely believe you're free? Have we been born and indoctrinated into a system of control under the illusion of freedom? The information tells us yes. Look at your own government-issued ID and any telephone bills, bank bills, visa bills, tax bills, mortgages, car loans. Look at the style of your name. It's the artificial person. It's a system of artificial persons, legal fictions, and corporations. And we're tricked into entering that jurisdiction and giving our full consent to be governed and being ruled by this system. All based on fraud and deceit. So there you have it. I hope you've learned something from this video and maybe been entertained somewhat. I know it's pretty dry material, but it's something we need to get this information out there. So thanks for watching. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and maybe give it a share. And once again, do your own research, develop your own level of knowledge and understanding, and then teach someone else. As usual, I will provide all the links down below, and please, by all means, look up this information for yourself. That being said, take care, have a great day, be safe.